welcome, and welcome to a special edition of the Week in Review. And in a minute, I'll tell you why it's special. But before that, as ever, I welcome to the show Mr. Mahmoud Mboj. Mr. Mboj, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Eddie. I'm glad to be here.
And usually, viewers, this is the point at which I say we've got 10 stories and we're going to go through them in some detail, spending a bit longer on some than on others. But this week, due to various circumstances, we've got 5 stories. But nonetheless, they're 5 brilliant stories. So I hope you'll forgive us, but don't worry. Next week, we'll be back to our usual 10. Is that okay? Good. I'm glad you agree. So I can even tell you the stories. We've got President Barrow has finished the Meet the People tour, and at the end of it, he visited some of the government development projects. We also hear surprising news from India about the acute kidney injury deaths and the cough syrups that were blamed. Also, there's been finally a National Advisory Council for Persons with Disabilities, and the women of Tangi and Brufut have been thrilled to get some smoking houses that have addressed some of their issues. And finally, the 5th story is the First Lady is pushing for girls' empowerment. So these are the 5, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, 5 great stories. So let's get cracking, shall we? The first one, the President has finished the constitutionally mandated Meet the People tour, and at the end of it, he decided to visit some government projects to see how they were getting on. Have a look, have a listen.
The place visited by the President was an OIC road project that covers and connects the communities of Sukuta, Tujereng, Madiana, Wulinkama, Banyaka and Brufut. The President found work progressing after delays caused by demolitions and relocation of service and water pipes. Residents gave the President a warm reception in anticipation of the positive impact of the roads on their lives. Next, the presidential tour party proceeded to the Jabang electricity substation, which is one of the power facilities that will supply electricity to communities in the Kombo North, South and Central.
I've been a bit naughty there, adding the bit about electricity, because it's been the bane of all our lives, not just in the Gambia, but in many countries in Africa. But Mr. Mboj, we saw people there cheering, not for what they have already, but for what they can see is about to be delivered, roads, etc., etc. So, as I said, he finished the tour, and people complained about some of these things, but finally he went to a community who could see what was about to be delivered to them.
Absolutely. So part of the tour now finished. That was the anchor leg, you know, the anchor sort of. So yes, went around, looked at all the projects. Granted, of course, he's been doing this for a while now.
Yes,
really.
yes, throughout the year.
Throughout the year.
Yes.
And we remember there was a time when he went around, we said he was satisfied with progress,
yes, right.
and then afterwards came
Yes.
back and said,
That
no, I'm not so satisfied, and stuff like that.
That's right.
And yes, but for me, the question is, I mean, I'm sure he's given some of these timeline. I think timeline is really important in a plan. Sometimes I get suspicious if I ask you for the timeline. When do you think you're going to complete this project or that? And you say, no, we haven't got a timeline, and I'm not sure really whether you're prepared.
You start to get worried.
You start to get worried.
Sure.
So we are told here the airport, the VVIP, very important persons lounge, should be complete in February.
That's right. Yes.
Okay, I'm granted. And there's also substation,
That's
the electrical
right.
substation
Yes.
in Kololi, and that should be early next year. What early means, I like sort of a bit more of precision and stuff like that.
Is it January or any time before June?
Any time soon.
Right,
and
right.
all of this is for the OIC conferences summit.
Indeed.
We've pushed it twice now, haven't we? We've been
Twice or
shifting
even 3 times,
We've
actually.
been 3 times.
2019 originally, and that was never realistic anyway.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, I understand that they're always quick to point out that when you look at Senegal, it took them a long time, you know what I mean? They kept on pushing it and all of that.
Right.
Granted. But with us now, when you look at the state of the roads, I mean, just even that aside, I mean, it's really horrendous. We should really prioritize it. What's the timeline? We understand that we can keep on shifting it, but indefinitely, it doesn't work like that. Can you just give us a realistic timeline?
Yeah, and I can give first hand because I live on Coastal Road, and so the road that leads from Bertel Harding, past Turntable, all the way down to the airport is part of the road that's being And for many months there was no work on the road, and so people were saying, well, you know, when are they going to get cracking, you know? And even there were times when we had dry weather, so it wasn't a case of the rain season had stopped them, although when it did come, it did then stop them. And people thought, why did you start a month before the rain season, not 2 or 3 months before it? And so now they're kind of making pace. And I have to say, you know, this is not me making any kind of political point. I live on that road, and I see them working there till past midnight. And sometimes I leave home just after 6 a.m. in the morning, and they already started working again. So they're kind of cracking on with it. And in fact, I have to say, this morning I drove on that part of the new road, and it's a very smooth road. It cut my journey by about 20 minutes, about 15 minutes, I beg your pardon. And that was quite, you know, a refreshing thing. But there's much more to do. Of course, that's just me giving one small example. But you're right. What we want are timelines, and you know, saying, okay, it's going to be finished by this, and that. So one road, you know, a quarter completed, is still a long way when they're talking about hosting it next year.
Absolutely, that goes to the very heart of issues. What are the benchmarks?
Sure.
At a certain period, we expect to see this. At another one, we expect to see that.
Sure.
So as citizens, we think that we deserve that information.
Yeah.
What are the timelines? Things cannot be open, as it were, actually open, for accountability purposes.
Well, yes, I mean, we've heard that the Saudis are funding all the, you know, a lot of these infrastructure projects. They must be making demands and saying, you know, well, you know, how are you getting on, you know, and why are things? We know, you know, COVID happened and all sorts of other things happened to slow down progress, you know, at a particular point. But they must be pushing and say, look, you know, it's our money that's funding a lot of this. You know, is it being spent wisely? Is it being spent, you know, in a kind of, you know, in the proper manner to make sure that things are delivered? Because they must be insisting on timelines and deadlines, and if so, can we also be let in on what those are?
Yes, that's absolutely so. But you realize that the diplomacy, diplomatic sensitivities, and all these considerations, they'll be there. But I am a citizen.
Yeah.
This is a slightly different angle.
Sure.
The way I'm looking at it, every day I commute from Brunswick here, and most people commute. Yeah. I mean, it's hell, you know, it's a really terrible.
I completely avoid that.
Absolutely.
Anyway,
so fine, OIC, all of fine, yeah?
Sure.
But even just for my purposes, get it over with as quickly as you can.
Yeah.
What are the timelines?
Communicate with us.
Absolutely.
Sure.
It cannot be perpetually open. What does that mean? You haven't really planned. I have to be honest.
There you go. As we've said at the beginning, we only have 5 stories, so we'd love to spend a longer on this one, but we can't. And now on to our next story. This one is one that for most people in the Gambia, when this happened, it was quite shocking. What am I talking about? I'm talking about the children who died as a result of acute kidney injury. Much of it was linked to 4 cough syrups manufactured in India. This week, in fact, just a matter of a day or 2 ago, the Indian government made an announcement. What did they announce? Have a look.
The WHO said it had tested samples of the syrups, promethazine oral solution, Cofex Melan baby cough syrup, Mecof baby cough syrup, and Maghrib and cold syrup, and found that they contain unacceptable amounts of chemicals that can damage the brain, lungs, liver, and kidneys of those who take them.
And you heard there not what the Indian government said, but that was the WHO reaction to it, Mr. Mboj. In fact, what the Indian government said was that they absolved Maiden Pharmaceuticals of any blame, said they had tested in their labs and found these to be of acceptable standard. Now, before you jump in, let me tell you what more WHO said when they heard that. They said, we are not backing down. What we found when we tested those syrups should not be in anything that is consumed by humans. Very strong statement. They didn't beat about the bush and they didn't back down. So what on earth is going on?
You know, when this story broke, remember for a while the company's operations were suspended.
Were shut down, yeah.
And what we heard was they had assessed certain key elements of the company and had found them sort of flouting certain standards.
And they'd been taken to court 3 times before this. So about the very sort of thing. to the extent where these drugs were no longer allowed to be sold in India. So I was rather surprised when the Indian government came out with this statement saying it met the standards of something that could be sold in India. In fact, they went on to say that. And my first thought was, well, so why isn't it being sold in India if you think it's good enough to be sold in India? But it's coming directly to the Gambia from India.
Listen to this Dr. Peter Adebayo Adewuyi, the resident advisor of the Gambia Field Epidemiology Training Program at Edward Francis Small Teaching Hospital, who said that when he heard that decision, he called it unbelievable. And he didn't just stop there. He said the greatest proof we have of the Indian company's involvement is that since we withdrew its drugs, we haven't had a single case. Now that is an interesting, you want to call it coincidence? Well, fine.
Well, what a coincidence.
That correlation, there's a quite interesting correlation.
Well, this is it. And, you know, this is a business that's worth between $40 to $50 billion a year to India. And so when this case broke, articles just sprouted out all over the place saying this could really tarnish the image of India and it being the kind of pharmaceutical manufacturer of the world, which is how people started. I don't want to be too cynical, but is this a kind of convenient diplomatic political statement by the Indian government that we've tested it and it's fit enough to be sold and consumed here, and yet it isn't? And yet, you know, WHO said completely the opposite.
Absolutely. We have to understand certain things that they don't. When it comes to Indian science, we've heard about it for a very long time. Even when you look at now with ICT, you know what I mean? They've got their own Silicon Valley, and with science, chemistry, they're brilliant at that.
Yeah, sure.
Nobody can ever deny that. But we've also seen the gaps in governance.
Yes. Yes.
You know, and the standards, the democracy, the corruption we suffer from, they also suffer from that.
Well, this is it.
So,
well, and they do, and in fact, I wish I could remember the name of the chap who wrote it, but there's a book, people can find it easily enough online. It's called The Bitterest Pill, and it's exactly about that, about the gaps in the pharmaceutical industry in India. And the guy he goes so far as to say because it's bringing in billions, then they're very kind of lax with regulation, because a lot of the countries that buy these drugs, they're not good at suing companies, and so, you know, he actually accuses the Indian government of not caring as long as the money is coming in.
Absolutely. And with all of them, they've got their geopolitical interests.
Sure.
There's a certain image that they want to sell.
Sure. So
perhaps they will have to defend some of these things. They have to put on a brave face on it. We all realize that.
Yeah, sure.
It's just that my fear, they can be whatever they want to be.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Sovereignty here. But from my side, from our side, because of what India is doing here, you know what I mean, all the money they help and all of that, would I have the confidence, really, would I have the strength, the character, to really look out for my interest? We can be friends, I accept what you're doing for me, but do I have that strength of character? That's really what it takes from leadership.
I was going to come to that, because the Gambia's own investigations, none of them have reported yet.
At all.
And so the question I was going to ask is, what if they report and it counters exactly what the Indian government has said? Is this going to harm the friendship between us and the government of India?
Or rather, would this India's statement, would it make us go back and change our report? We don't even know. There are all kinds of possibilities here. We must keep an open mind. I mean, look at it. India, they've already given the findings of their investigation.
Very, very quickly.
Yes. With us, how long?
Yes, and we still don't know when. There's no deadline.
Investigations, really?
I think we've got 4 going here.
Casamance.
There
was supposed to be, I haven't heard anything yet. So, this is it. Investigation, so when? How long? Would we have the confidence, given how vulnerable we are, would we have the confidence to really stand up for ourselves? You know what I mean? We used to punch above our weight. Well, I mean, right now, there's no weight at all.
Well, I'm emboldened by Myanmar and our stance in that one. And I'm hopeful that if the report comes out and it contradicts what the Indian government is saying, we will take it to them and we won't back down. But that's me just being a romantic, possibly.
Myanmar looks big, but in many ways, it's really low-hanging fruit. The challenge is really here.
Yeah, sure.
The bigger challenge, the most difficult stuff, that's really the high-hanging fruit.
That's it. Thank you for that. And this takes us to our third story. Since I came to the Gambia, one of the things I've noticed, and anybody who's lived in the West, is the lack of access for people and the lack of visibility for people with disabilities. But now there's a National Advisory Council for persons with disabilities. Have a look.
What we are urging to the government and our esteemed partners, without whom we can do little or none, is to ensure the heart of this particular Persons with Disabilities Act, which is what? The full and effective implementation of these fundamental rights of persons with disabilities. As the saying goes, existing laws without implementations will only tantamount as dead letters, and we do not want to see that.
We don't want dead letters. Magistrate Kurubali there, Mr. Mboj, we get the point that he's making, and it's a point you and I have made in lots of different contexts. We have lots of laws that we have passed, but they're not implemented. Now we have this advisory council, which apparently their job will be to ensure that these laws are enforced or implemented. What's the likelihood of that happening?
That's exactly it. Let's look at other bodies formed for similar purposes, and see how they fared. Be it the Land Commission, be it others. There are so many bodies formed to serve similar functions, similar roles, similar purposes, yet perhaps they wouldn't give you the resources, you wouldn't have the resources.
That's what I was
we all
going
complain about resources and the like. And your recommendations, well done, or maybe it depends on the political advantage one can get from that. So I'm not sure. I mean, the law is one thing, as we said before, the implementation. So what needs to change?
Because when I heard Magistrate Kurubali there talking about what they will do about enforcing, and he talked about how useless it will be if these are not implemented, my first thought was that are they going to announce that we've been given an office, a building, this is the equipment we've been given, these are the resources we've been given X amount of cars and this and that, computers and so on, to effectively run and monitor. I didn't hear any of that at that event, and I watched pretty much the whole however many hours because I was trying to find out whether any of that was mentioned. I can tell you it wasn't mentioned, and so I was a bit disappointed that, okay, you're saying they're going to enforce, they're going to implement and make sure that people don't skip their responsibilities, but what tools have you got to force them, and what teeth do you have if they don't do these things that they're supposed to do?
Eddie, I think we ratified the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in 2015.
Indeed.
What changed really
between then and
between then and now? There are certain structures, certain underlying conditions, as it were, that must exist before this council can be effective.
Indeed.
It is as simple as that. This is why so many councils, formed for the sake of the same purposes, they don't really function as they should, because the conditions are not there for them to be effective. That's a huge problem. How do we change that? So with this council, yes, on the face of it, it's a good thing to have these bodies, but again, the other part is they must be effective for it to make sense. Otherwise, probably you're wasting. Because some money would go in, you know what I mean? That's it. So when the money goes in, really, I have to make it yield something for me. Otherwise, you wasted it.
And I certainly hope they're not doing that. But that takes us to our fourth story, Mr. Mboj. Pardon me. The women of Tangier, Brufut and other places that are fish landing sites have been smoking fish in what I would call, for want of a sort of charitable word, traditional methods. And there are much more modern, I beg your pardon, and much better methods. And now somebody organization has come to their aid. Have a look.
On behalf of the beneficiaries, Bibi Mane, President of Women Fish Smokers in Brufut, and Fatmata Conte, Women Leader for Tanje Fish Smokers, both thanked the FAO and the Ministry of Fisheries for the project.
Before the construction of this new smoking house, after closing from work, we board vehicle while putting on our dirty clothes with bad odor. Other passengers will even complain about our condition because they would not want to get the bad smell from us. But that is a thing of the past now. Because of your remarkable support, we are happy and we thank you for such good gestures.
Fish smoking, Mr. Mboj, we're talking about it, and I chose that particular excerpt because it tells of some of the problems that are going to be taken away. Before, it would have been an open sort of system where they would, and now it's all enclosed, and the odor is retained, and so they don't get on these buses or taxis smelling of fish. A small but significant event, surely.
Oh, absolutely. And if we can have this all landing sites,
which is my hope.
Which is the whole idea and all of that. Yep. But you know that for our purposes, we just cannot remain there. Say thank you, that's a good thing, and all of that. Because now, when we talk about these developmental gestures for now, because cumulatively, as an aggregation, that's really the one. That's it. But then the next thing is, okay, now, who would be responsible for the upkeep?
For the upkeep, I'm glad you mentioned
that.
Do
we have an admin structure in place? You see, the minutiae, the difficulty, that's really the legwork.
Sure.
But it is really the legwork that keeps it up.
Sure.
in many ways. Yes. So we then tend to do that.
Sure.
Then you begin to see that within 2 years, 3 years, we haven't got this, we haven't serviced it for this.
Sure.
The usual, the symptoms. We all recognize the symptoms.
Yeah, quite. I mean, when our colleagues came back and they were all excited about it, I said, look, I don't want to be a kind of damp squib. I said, but, let's go back in a year's time. Well, let's go back to that place in 2 years' time, exactly as you just said. Will we have kept it up to the standards, the pristine condition that it's now been handed over? If that hasn't happened, after about 3, 4, 5 years, it'll be defunct and they'll be looking for more funding to build something new and different again. We need to get into this maintenance culture.
Absolutely. You see, the parallel I will draw here is that advice against instant gratification. It almost sort of makes you sort of sit on the laurels, as it were. They're happy, we've achieved. But for me, with things like that, such gifts or support, for me, it's a trouble, it's a problem.
Yeah, sure.
Because my sense of honor means I'm going to have to use this well. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So for me, when I get such things, the first thing I say is, oh my Lord, what a burden, what a responsibility.
Right.
Now what do I do?
Yes. I mean, what I would have loved to have heard would have been from UNIDO, who didn't even get a mention. They thanked FAO and Ministry of Fisheries, but UNIDO are the ones who handed it over, United Nations Industrial Development Organization. Sorry for the abbreviation. They're the ones who did it. But I would have liked to have seen them say, look, we've trained X number of engineers or whatever, whose job it is to repair this, clean it on a regular basis, clean it in a particular way, kind of methodical system so even some of these people who train in that could be the very women who use it daily.
Absolutely, I accept that. But I also accept that as a community, when we are given this sort of things, there's a certain there's a reception, there's a certain way that I should receive these things and try to do the rest for myself. So we really have to come back, start to preach the idea of relying on myself on certain things. I'm afraid this culture of dependency, we see it everywhere. And then we have even come to define good and bad person based on whether you're willing to give. It's an extraordinary situation to be. Then one is in a trap. I said, money will determine anything. Loyalties. You see, the deeper, the higher feelings, they will be blunted.
But this is it. I mean,
extraordinary.
To throw it back to the people who, UNIDO, FAO, and so on, should they be insisting to communities things like, if we give you this, how will you look after it? Tell us, convince us, before we hand it over to you. Perhaps they did ask that, I don't know.
Absolutely, and yes, they probably do. But for me, the deeper thing is, oh, that's even disappointing for me, because it's a bit like the horse and the water. I mean, it's like trying to force a horse to drink, as it were. Yeah. So you're forcing me to do the right thing. The game is lost.
Quite. I should want to do the right
thing
anyway.
I should want to do the right thing. That's the true revolution. Really.
Yeah.
Anything else? That's why people keep saying, oh, Yahya Jammeh should have been here. You mean I cannot take any initiative?
Yeah.
You think I'm still a slave on the plantation? I need somebody with a lynch to lynch me to do the right thing? You see the mentality?
Yeah.
Oh, we need somebody hard because Gambians do not listen. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
We're human beings.
I hear that.
Oh, that's so worrying. I can't believe it.
A depressing thought.
It's a depressing thought.
And that takes us to our fifth story, and I usually at this point say and halfway, but this will be the end of this particular program, because as I announced at the beginning. And this one we go back, we go to the First Lady, and there's the African Leaders Summit, which is taking place in America, and there was a similar summit for First Ladies, and our First Lady, the Gambia's First Lady, spoke there. Here's some of what she had to say.
The First Ladies at the event included those of the Gambia, Sierra Leone, Cape Verde, Angola, Madagascar, Botswana, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. President Madabio of Sierra Leone also attended. In her keynote address, First Lady Madam Fatimata Barbaro recognized education as a critical tool to unleash the potential in young girls. She calls on her fellow First Ladies to unite in ensuring more enrollment and retention of girls in school.
We need to unite as African First Ladies to speak for the voiceless so that their voices can be heard.
The viewers, you heard our First Lady. Apologies for the sound quality, but I hope you got what she was getting at. Mr. Mboji, in another context, on this very program, we were talking about the National Council, and you were talking about if the environment is not there for it to mean something, then it means nothing. Effectively, her speech was about girls' empowerment, and she was pushing for girls' empowerment. The wider society needs to embrace and change for that to have any meaning, surely. We have the lowest representation of women in Parliament, for example. That's also an indication of the society we live in. Girls' empowerment, how, you know?
Absolutely. The wider society will change, but you know how change is like in fits and starts over time. Social change is like that.
Sure.
So there's a way in which institutions can help. We saw in Europe what happened. They came up with certain laws, wanted to change people's conduct behavior, and they enforced it.
That's right.
Short of saying that, you know, universal education, you know, start doing things like that, and perhaps in public institutions, quota systems. So you need the institution to lead.
Yeah, indeed.
Here in Africa, the way we are, institutions must really take the initiative. It's just the way the situation is. That's why it's so difficult.
Sure.
Very few people can do it. There's a lot of talk, but building institutions is extremely difficult. You see, demolishing old ones, which we did with colonialism and that, but post-colonialism to build.
Indeed.
Now, that's been extremely
that's been the tough
difficult.
one. And she said there that, you know, education is the game changer. Well, it can be a game changer if, as we said, you know, if certain things happen. On its own, it's not a game changer, because if you educate a girl and she's not allowed to do anything with that education, then it's been fairly pointless.
Absolutely. It's a package. But wherever we can sort of advocate, this is a good advocacy platform, wherever we can advocate for some of these issues, we should. I think that in itself is a good thing.
Sure.
I know that this event was organized by what they call Women United Foundation.
That's right, yes.
An NGO, as it were, in the US and that sort of
That's
thing.
correct.
But I couldn't help sort of reflect on the idea of all these First Ladies. You know what I mean?
Yes, indeed.
Having this kind of event.
Yes.
You know, me, maybe I have to confess this. Years back, I wrote a piece on First Ladydom.
I'd love to read that someday. Right.
So this is it. It is not an official position of state.
This is it.
Yet,
Yes.
when it goes out, it claims
Yes.
sort of, or it represents, it's in a situation representing us.
Sure. At least we've not reached the stage of Kenya yet where the daughter, there's the office of the first daughter, which has caused a lot of controversy in Kenya. We're not there yet. But a lot of the first ladies now want to get actively involved in certain things that are not necessarily just campaigning with their husbands, the various presidents. They want to have initiatives of their own that they push. And this is one such initiative.
That's it. But because of your proximity to the president, it gives you so much political influence.
Oh,
we all know that.
Of course.
So some people, South African researchers did some research on this, looking at this phenomenon called sort of first ladies.
Yeah.
I mean, we grew up on the Jawara. There was really no such thing. They called them Lady Jamie, Lady this, because of Sadauda Karuba. Jawara was knighted. So
right.
there's a convention there.
That's right.
But now we've taken up this media idea, which is not bad in itself. Graça Machel,
Yes, quite.
the only woman we know who's been first lady in two different countries.
Yeah.
So everybody talks about the wonderful things that she's doing. So that could be room for what wonderful things. But we've also heard about Gucci Grace.
Yeah.
Or some people call her Disgrace.
Indeed.
We've also heard about Imelda Marcos and the rest. So there are models out there.
Sure.
We want to make sure that we have the right model.
Sure.
Can we put it on a constitutional footing?
Sure.
Most of these, firstly, it is not. It's important to regulate some of these things for accountability purposes and transparency, because it's a powerful position. I mean, she's been doing good. The mammography machine, and we've been covering all sorts of stories.
Indeed.
But the area is nebulous.
Sure.
It is important to set things down so that we will know the boundaries. Otherwise, nobody really knows the boundaries. We remember about the 30 million that was put into the Fatima Barrow Foundation.
Right.
I think that was the very reason why I wrote the piece.
Right.
That let us be careful the road we are going down.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
We want to move away from the old ways of doing things. I am not against the position, if you like, per se, in theory, but let's write down what we expect of it.
Thank you. I think that's a great point to end on. And dear viewers, if you just joined us, then I'm not going to say join us after the break, because sadly, this week at least, this is the end of the program. But as always, I have to say to friend and colleague, thank you, Mr. Mboch.
Cheers.
And to you, the viewer, thank you for tuning in, and thank you for being understanding. Until the next time, goodbye.